Hey crew, it's your Captain Caliban speaking. I wanted to take a minute before we get started this year to say welcome back to the show. Enterprising Individuals is back for our third year, and we've got an all-new batch of great shows and great guests for this season. Every other Wednesday, I and a guest will be looking at a selected episode of a Star Trek series, from TOS all the way to Enterprise. And every other Wednesday, I'll be back to bring you the news from the world of Trek, plus interviews with people in the world of Trek literature, Trek actors and writers, and more for our supplemental shows. Also, on each supplemental show, we'll have a special segment that takes an extra deep dive into an aspect or element of the episode that we covered on the previous week. So look out for that. It's all very exciting, and I'm really looking forward to sharing with you the great interviews and guests and insights we've got on some great episodes of Star Trek this year. So stay tuned. And while you're tuned in, take a moment, if you would, to give us a rating and a review on your listening platform of choice, because that really helps us out. Also, that's right, you can be a part of the crew of the USS Enterprising Individuals by joining the conversation on Facebook and Twitter. You can weigh in on our latest episode or get notified when the newest episode drops by following us on Twitter at EISTPod, and at the same place on Facebook. Use the hashtag EISTPOD when you're tweeting about the show, or the hashtag Discoverage if you're tweeting about Star Trek Discovery. And speaking of Discovery, the first season of Discovery is over, but our Star Trek Discoverage live recap shows are still available in our show feed. You can hear me and my co-host Ella Pearson of the Generations Geek podcast talk with a new guest each week about the latest episode of Discovery, taped immediately after the episode airs on CBS All Access. They're fresh and piping hot, at least they were then, so go check those out. And if you really want to be a part of the mission of Enterprising Individuals, check out our Patreon page at patreon.com/EISTpod. We have many tiers or ranks at which you can join and become a member of the crew and get access to content like our live shows and my DS9 rewatch reviews, where I go all the way through the 7 seasons of Deep Space Nine and give my impressions of each episode, which, now that I've made it out of the first season, is becoming more and more of a treat for me, and it can be a treat for you as well. So check us out at patreon.com/EISTpod. Questions, comments, marriage proposals? You can contact the show at EISTPOD@gmail.com. We're waiting to receive your transmission. Enjoy the show, and let's get underway.
It's worked so far, but we're not out yet.
I wanna know what you're thinking. There are some things you can't hide. I wanna know what you're feeling. Tell me what's on your mind.
Pure energy.
Hailing frequencies open, and welcome to Enterprising Individuals, the Star Trek discussion podcast that boldly goes into excruciating detail about the series, characters, and stories of the Star Trek universe. I'm your host, Caliban, and wearing a silver lamé spacesuit is perfectly acceptable, but not after Labor Day. I'm joined on this episode by Gordon Purcell. Gordon is a comics artist who has worked for nearly 30 years in the industry on properties like the Fantastic Four, Superman, Justice League, and Moon Knight. He's also drawn Star Trek comics for nearly as long, having worked on series featuring the original crew, the Next Generation crew, DS9, and Voyager. Gordon, welcome to the show.
And also Captain Pike's crew, which is an odd one.
Of course, that's correct. This is before the wheelchair years.
Yes, I drew. So I drew that group, but I couldn't do their likenesses. I could only draw what I remembered. But basically, they looked like the real crew.
Right. Well, permission to come aboard granted. Today we'll be talking about the Tholian Web, the 9th episode of the 3rd season of Star Trek, the original series. The 3rd season of Star Trek is generally held to be inferior to its first 2, due to a number of factors like the reduced budgets, studio pressure, and a brain drain of creative talent on the show's writing staff. Over the years, much of the criticism of the show's 3rd season and its subsequent cancellation has landed at the feet, of Fred Freiberger, the producer brought in to replace John Meredith Lucas, who himself was tapped to replace departing producer Gene Kuhn during the show's 2nd season. But the truth, in television production, as in real life, is never quite that simple, and we'll get to that a little later in the show. But first, Gordon, what's your backstory? How did you come to Star Trek, become a Star Trek fan?
Well, it was in syndication when I was coming home from school in grade school and high school. And so this is one of the shows I would watch. I also watched Lost in Space, and then I think when I was younger, Gilligan's Island.
Well, yeah.
Probably Flintstones, I'm sure. But this really caught me, and when I was most interested in more about television, more than just being light entertainment. And I remember in high school there was I can't remember whether the Easy Readers or something. There were some Scholastic books, I think it was.
Yeah.
They actually had some sort of play of one of the Star Trek episodes.
Oh, really?
The one from when they go back to Earth, and because the pilot has taken their picture.
Oh, yes.
And that actually was a screenplay that they did, and we did it in class. It wasn't with costumes or anything. I think I played Scotty.
Okay.
But I even got, that's probably the first time I even saw a TV kind of script.
Okay.
So it's always been one of the shows that's most in my mind when it comes to making TV and stuff. I also bought that Making of Star Trek book, which is a very wonderful book, especially at that time, that really goes into a lot of detail about making TV shows.
Yeah.
And I think some of my interest is I was interested in making TV shows or how they do that. It's so remote to me. I grew up in a small town in Wisconsin, and just the whole thing about Hollywood was so remote.
Yeah, it seems like another world, yeah.
Well, and it probably is.
Another planet. It's so weird that particular episode would be a script, because there's all kinds of special effects, and there's, exterior shots of jets, following the Enterprise. And you'd think that a script like a third season script would be a good script for kids to do, because there's, there's fewer special effects. Like Let That Be Your Last Battlefield would be a good little talky script for a bunch of kids to do.
I cannot tell you why they did it. I don't really remember. I know my friend Tom found the script.
Okay.
So I believe he played Kirk, but I don't remember any other details.
Sure.
Except I'm pretty sure he played Scotty. It's possible I was McCoy, but I think I was Scotty.
Yeah, I mean, if you didn't say that anybody was dead, I guess you'd know that you weren't playing McCoy.
Well, I think Scotty beams up people accidentally or whatever.
Right, yeah, right.
So that was my
the Night Watchman.
Memory.
Yeah.
Yes, and me trying to do a really bad Scottish accent.
This is a time, too, where you mentioned shows like Gilligan's Island, like where things were kind of, if something was on, it was just, 3 or 4 channels, so everybody had seen it. Like, we've all seen the majority of Gilligan's Island episodes, even though we wouldn't consider ourselves big island heads or whatever fans of Gilligan's Island call themselves. Whereas today, there's so many shows that unless something is, really stands out from the pack and you have a great recommendation from a friend, it's a crapshoot whether you've seen what somebody else has seen.
Yeah, that's very true. There's a lot of shows from the 80s, for example, like Different Strokes and Facts of Life. I've never seen those shows at all. I was in college. I didn't really watch that much TV in college.
Yeah.
I'm familiar with things like the Munsters and Addams Family, which they showed side by side, even though they're probably competitors. And
oh, yeah, absolutely.
The Star Trek and Lost in Space to a little lesser extent. Lost in Space, I love the first season, and then after that, it's a crapshoot.
Yeah, it starts to go down too. I'm interested in as well as how you got into comics.
I do have degrees in both theater and studio arts from the University of Minnesota, and I mentioned this to you, but I always found the theater one helped more because there's a lot about staging and interpreting scripts and having sets, kind of come up with costumes and sets and casting, lighting. A lot of that stuff is stuff you learn in theater, actually. The main thing that the art helped was just life drawing and things like that. So anyway, I have those degrees, and at the end of that graduation year, they had a convention, and so I decided to go to that. And before that, my year before I graduated, I went to New York and drew on my own with wrong dimensions and all a page of DC art, Justice League, and a page of some sort of Marvel art. And Marvel wouldn't even let you. You dropped off the art, and I just came and picked it up the next day. Nobody had anything to say. No. But DC, one of the editors, Ernie Colon, brought me in and talked to me for quite a long time. It was very kind of him, and he had a lot of instructions. So I got into some sort of new talent program, but then he left as an editor, and it's one of those kind of things. So when I went to the convention here, I brought the art that I had done there. One of the artists, Greg Guler, needed some help doing layouts on a book that he was behind on, so I did that, and that was my first job. It was Captain Paragon, I think it was called. Yeah. Sentinels of Justice. And from there, I would get little tiny jobs. I did some work at City Pages. I did London's Bar for First. I did little jobs until DC had a real new talent program, and Marvel did too. And Marvel's was to draw a Spider-Man story, some pages of that, and I was a runner-up to Mark Bagley, who actually won the contest.
Right, sure, yeah.
And at DC, what it evolved to, they had several of these new programs, and I keep getting put into them and then just passed on. But by that point, they had FedEx, and so it wasn't so hard. So they assigned me something called a bonus book, which was a free book for the customer, where it was like a shorter story, like maybe a 18-page story or something like that they just put as an addition in the middle of a book. Mine was Flash.
Okay.
And it was a Dr. Light story. And that was my first job. They liked how I drew the faces. It was a kind of a funny story with a bunch of kids taking down a villain, which became part of continuity because the character became much crueler and stuff because he's so embarrassed by this. And I think the next job I did was a Spectre job, and then I got Star Trek, or maybe a Teen Titans first and a Flash. But Star Trek was in there somewhere.
Sure.
And so I did a couple of the last issues of the first run from DC that Ricardo Villagrán inked. And then when they lost the license for, I don't know, it seems like a month. It's not very long. They came back with the license that had Next Generation too, and so I think I drew a couple of Next Generation things, including an annual that I did with John de Lancie, the actor who played Q, who acted out every story. He would call me up and act out everything.
Well, again, that's the theater background. He's an actor.
Yeah, yes, and he didn't get along very well with DC, so he did everything through me, which is strange because I really didn't have all that much experience, but here I was, basically helping write the story, or at least breaking it down, because he only understood film scripts, so I had to break it down to a comic book kind of story. Anyway, I think because I wrestled that well enough, they assigned me to the regular Star Trek book with issue 11, and I did that, and I've done it off and on. My last issue was a Waypoint story for IDW.
Well, the Star Trek license has definitely jumped around between a lot of companies, and you yourself have worked for many different brands in your career. What is it about the freelancer experience, that not being connected to one particular label, that's superior in your mind?
Kind of depends on what stage you are in your career and things like that. But a lot of people like the freedom. I at one point wanted to not just draw licensed books. I wanted to draw superhero books. I ended up working for Marvel for about 4 years, just doing superhero books and such. Because, you just want some variety in what you're doing. And of course, when you get into comics, it's most kids, I read superhero books. There weren't a lot of other kind of books when I was growing up. It's not like now,
oh, yeah.
where there's quite a huge variety of genres out there. I would say at DC I was a little bit labeled as the Star Trek guy. So it was good to go to Marvel and do that. And then I ended up doing Malibu's version of Deep Space Nine, which is, I believe, still is the highest selling Star Trek comic of all time. And then I moved on to do it for DC because they had a new editor who was a very good woman named Margaret Clark. And I had a really great time until, once again, Marvel saw an opportunity and told the people from Paramount that they're the number one company and they should be publishing Star Trek comics. And so they did that, and again at Marvel, they didn't think of me. They don't want to have the same people drawing that do at DC. So I did go for a while without drawing Star Trek. So once I got to do it again at I think Wildstorm and IDW, I enjoyed it a lot more. I came back to it with a really good love. I mean, one of the things is I knew I could do it. I had ideas about how to make my art better. And so I was very enthusiastic about it, and I still am.
Well, that's great.
Sure.
Why'd you select the Tholian Web to talk about on the show today?
I think it's one of the best of the bottle shows. I'm sure you could define the bottle show, but they basically shot just on the Enterprise sets that are already built, and it's a way to save some money outside of the special effects. I will say that the version that you can find on Netflix with the redone special effects is an improved version in my mind, because the Tholian Web itself, the Tholian ships, look so much better.
Yeah.
And the web effect is a little bit more effective. I feel that it has a lot of emotional heft to it, where some of the other ones don't. And they do have to go through things quickly, but so it could have been more, but it's really a strong one, since the bulk of it is about Bones and Spock dealing with Kirk being gone and the new dynamic that would add to their relationship. In the meantime, of course, they're going, there's these, what would you call it, space oddity that's kind of
space
messing
madness
with their brains.
Yes.
And so, which seems to obviously not affect Spock so much, but does affect McCoy. And there's a lot of interesting things in this episode. When the crew members go mad, they have a fisheye lens often, which is an interesting effect for that time period. There's just interesting acting all this way, because McCoy is kind of a little bit all over the place, which I guess they would probably call the space madness, where Spock has to be kind of rock. But on the other hand, Spock makes the more emotional choice in some ways of trying to be there to get Kirk, to save Kirk, where McCoy is actually taking the more Spock-like argument that logically we got to get out of here before we all get crazy.
Yeah.
It also has the entire regular cast, including Chapel, which is nice.
Yeah, as many as the third season episodes did.
Yeah, it also has Chekhov going crazy.
Yeah, and some great Chekhov screams in this one, too.
Yes. It has a little bit of humor from Scotty and his drinking the solution.
Yes.
And the ending is quite charming, I think, where Kirk talks to them a little bit about what did they go through his tapes, and they, for some reason, they choose to keep him in the dark.
Right.
And it's interesting to see how far Spock will go with the lie.
Yeah.
One of my favorite scenes is the tape scene where Kirk gives his final instructions to, and well-founded advice, but the shot they dwell on a lot is just a two-shot of Spock and McCoy, and Spock is very stoic, and McCoy goes through a lot of different emotions in the shot.
In the great DeForest Kelley way, yeah.
Yes, and he also apologizes twice, which is nice to see to Spock, that he actually can see where he's been going wrong. A lot of the thing that doesn't scan 100% is he's always talking about, that Spock wants to get his own command.
Right.
Which never seems to be the truth. And I believe there are other episodes where he does this, and I never see that in his character. I think he's like Riker. He just doesn't seem to ever really have that ambition.
I think that he knows that he does very well in the position that he's in, and he wouldn't shy from command if Kirk was incapacitated. But he's got that great line where McCoy is sort of twisting the knife on that issue, and like, Spock, you've done all this, and if you get us out of here, then you're captain and you're in command. And Spock's like, I'm already in command. Like,
Yeah.
I'm not trying to manipulate the situation. Like, I have what you say that I want. So what do I want here?
Yeah, what's the logic to this? And it's like I think McCoy sometimes thinks of him as just like what any other up and coming officer would be, but he doesn't always appreciate the difference that Spock is as a half Vulcan and all that.
Yeah.
But I also sometimes wonder if it's not just weakness in writing.
That is entirely possible.
Yeah, there's two writers. One was a woman, which I always thought was one of the problems they sometimes had, was that they, like DC Fontana used the initial DC because the networks didn't really like women writers or something like this on these shows.
Yeah, I think that it was sort of uncommon back then. We'll get to that after we do our technical details. I wanted to say that this is, of course, the Tholian Web we're talking about, the 9th episode of the 3rd season. It first aired on November 15th of 1968. As you mentioned, it was written by a woman, Judy Burns, and also Chet Richards. Judy Burns is a TV writer and a producer who has credits on other shows like Magnum P.I., Mission Impossible, Knight Rider, and T.J. Hooker. And she wrote the Star Trek Continues episode, Still Treads the Shadow, which is a continuation of the Tholian Web. And she's still writing today. She's had a long, successful career. But this was her first TV script, and it was, as far as I can tell, unsolicited. And as far as the other writer, Chet Richards, I don't know. This is his only credit. Memory Alpha has him listed in one place as Burns's husband and on another page as her friend. And I couldn't find any other info online. But if they were some kind of team, you think they would have done more. Or maybe he was just giving her some ideas as a husband, and then she's like, no, I got this from now on. So I'm not sure which one is more likely.
Or maybe they divorced.
Or maybe they just split up. Yeah, exactly. They were both interviewed for Mark Cushman's These Are the Voyages book. And again, no mention there of their relationship. So anyway, I think Judy Burns' career speaks for itself. The episode was directed by Herb Wallerstein, but thereby hangs a tale, because Ralph Sineski was originally hired to direct the episode, and he was fired near the end of the episode's production by Fred Freiberger for going over budget. Nearly all of the remaining footage in the episode was shot by Sineski. Sineski was considered the third rotating director for the series. He was always filling in when Joe Pevney and Mark Daniels were unavailable, and he directed a total of 7 episodes for the show, or 6.5 maybe, considering this one. He's actually the guy who, you mentioned the fisheye lens effect before. That was his idea. He used it in Is There in Truth No Beauty as well.
Right, that's where I remembered it being more distinctive.
Yeah. As for Wallerstein, he directed 4 episodes of the 3rd season, and he went on to direct for other TV shows, such as I Dream of Jeannie, The Brady Bunch, and Wonder Woman. Here's a funny and sad story in equal measure. He was actually killed by his housekeeper in 1985. A woman named Mayor Melendez Lopez, who claimed that she was acting in self-defense, and she was found not guilty on manslaughter charges. So his career was cut short, as well as his life was at that point.
Oh, that's odd.
Yeah, it's really very strange. And the start date for this episode is 5693.2. So, Gordon, your assignment, if you can, is to give us a 25-word synopsis of the Tholian Web.
Since I don't have the technical words, I would just say that the crew comes across the Defiant, which is in a part of space that is, well, now I've probably gone over 25.
Not there yet.
Kirk disappears. Spock and McCoy have to recover him before the Tholians destroy the ship. Maybe that's close enough.
And space madness. Right.
Space madness.
I think that's perfect. Here's some interesting facts about this episode from the memory banks. I think that this episode might be the first depiction of a video will. This was pointed out in a paper by Jerry W. Beyer of the Texas Tech University School of Law, referring, of course, to Kirk's pre-recorded message in the event of his death, his message to Spock and McCoy.
There's one other thing that I think is that I never really see a lot, but McCoy often is wearing a pouch, a medical pouch throughout, where he doesn't always grab things from it, but it's like a holster.
Right.
I can recall like his old cowboy days.
Right. Yeah. Right.
But he doesn't seem to have that pouch a lot of other scenes that I've seen on other episodes, which seems odd. It seems like it's reasonable for him to have it.
Yeah, and this is one where he spends a lot of time, working on a cure. Although he also spends a lot of time running up to the bridge and yelling at Spock when he probably should just be working on the cure.
Well, also if you're going to say where things are budget-wise cheap, they have these giant, it looks like bottles from a hair salon,
yes,
filled with colored water.
Yeah.
And this is the what is it called, Therigan derivatives or whatever. We'll try this out. It's like, well, first of all, there's a lot of it in there, and second, they just don't look modern. They look old. It was one thing where sometimes they used like salt shakers and stuff as medical instruments. This one looks really cheap.
Just flasks, right? Yeah.
Yeah, well, it looked better if they were in beakers or something like that. Them being in these plastic bottles are just goofy. Why not milk bottles at that point?
Sure, just pours it out of a milk carton. There you go.
Well, I'm going to use this let's experiment on this. What is it, blood? Is it Therigan? They don't really explain it. Why do you have so much Therigan?
Yeah, I think it looks a little like Tang.
Oh, yeah, that really does look like Tang. And again, that's a pretty good scene, actually. But the idea that they're all getting drunk on the bridge, it's kind of funny.
Right. Well,
they had a couple other ones where they're all laughing at the end.
Well, it's kind of the Mad Men solution to office problems. We'll just get drunk.
Yeah, and maybe that is the end. That's the way it should go. But the part that caught me as a kid, again, is these are characters I knew. This is actually more of a character episode, I would say, that you learn a little bit about some of the other characters, not just Kirk all the time.
Right, and it's a show that has no guest stars.
Nope, unless the voice of the
Tholian, yeah.
Which is probably Scotty. But,
right.
And Kirk is barely in it. There aren't that many episodes where Kirk isn't kind of the dead center of the show.
Yeah.
And so that's interesting. And again, it's just, I think at the time it really caught me because it just went into their characters. And as a kid, I wouldn't have thought of that.
Uh-huh.
But it showed that you could do something deeper. They didn't do that so much in, say, I didn't know what Dr. Smith was all about or Gilligan. This is something where you're kind of learning a little bit more about them and that they have some sort of history, like you saw Kirk's medals and stuff like that.
Right, yeah.
That kind of stuff is always really interesting to me. The one where they go to the planet and the flower shoot at Spock, and that's another one where you kind of see that Kirk had a past, and he looks at his medals and stuff like that.
Sure.
And that Spock had a past. Those are the kind of episodes I ended up liking more in a lot of ways.
Yeah, and especially coming from such a young writer as well, it's really it stands out. The concept, speaking of the writer, the concept for the episode came from an idea that Judy Burns had about spirits floating around the Enterprise. But of course, Roddenberry's Bible for the series specified that all the elements had to be science-based, so she was going to have to find a new way to do her ghost story. And Burns, and I can't confirm this, but she would have been 21 or 22 at the time, which again is crazy, but I'm assuming she was a college or grad school student. She got the idea from a fellow student that was studying physics about the theory of alternate dimensions and other realities, and she decided to use that to bring her ghost story to life.
Yeah, because that part of the story makes sense. There are things that don't make sense. The Tholian Web itself, although again it's enhanced a lot by the current version that's out.
Right.
I don't know exactly how that operates. Evidently, they just sit there still while they do this web around them. It seems like they could have gotten around this any time. And then when they actually get thrown free from the Tholian Web, I still don't really understand how they did that. Right.
Well, it's funny because this is so there's a pair of Enterprise episodes called In a Mirror Darkly, which deal with the mirror universe, and they were conceived as a prequel to Mirror Mirror, the TOS episode, and a sequel to this episode, and it features the mirror universe Archer encountering the Defiant, which has been thrown out of the normal reality into another reality, the mirror universe. And so it sort of we see the Tholians again, and it's sort of a follow-up to this.
Yeah, I saw the Enterprises. I have not seen them a second time for the most part, so I don't remember the show quite as well.
Sure.
The other ones, I saw probably every one of them at least twice.
Yeah. This episode features the first appearance of a starship named the Defiant, although the ship's name in the original draft of the script was the Scimitar. This is the first appearance of our aforementioned silver lamé spacesuits, which, although they are very unique in appearance, I think they are a far step above the shower curtain suits from the episode The Naked Time. In the original draft of the script, the crew was actually going to wear life support shields, similar to the life support belts that they would use in the animated series.
Okay.
Which I'm not sure was probably a budget thing. It was probably just wear these belts, and then we'll do one, superimposed effect where something bumps into you, and we see that it's a suit or an energy field.
I assume that's actually the animation, that they didn't want to put all the characters into a different suit. It's probably just cheaper.
The script was heavy on special effects as it was. Special effects artist Mike Miner said in an interview that it took 3 to 4 months to complete the effects for the show, which is a lot, and they cost $90,000, which is also a lot. But the show was nominated for an Emmy Award for its special effects. The spacesuits were designed by show costumer Bill Thies, of course, and they were made to Roddenberry's edict that the future had no zippers or fasteners, which meant that the cast had to be sewed into them before every take, and every time they went to the bathroom, of course, they had to cut them out and then sew them back in. And that's one of the reasons that the show ended up a day behind, and that's one of the reasons that Sineski was fired. So it's all, a stack of dominoes.
So because of the costumes and the special effects, it ran over budget.
Yeah, that's right.
They took it out on the director.
Yeah. I mean, that's something that we can definitely talk about. It's one of the things I want to talk about chiefly on this episode, the idea that a guy like Ralph Sineski, who had served the show for so long, just fell victim to this edict and the pressures that were on the show during the third season. The suits' helmets featured a wire mesh covering the actors' faces, which was employed to allow the cast to breathe. They used that instead of perspex or glass or something. However, I noticed, as you probably did on Netflix, now that the show's been remastered, you can easily see the mesh. It looks like a screen door that's over their face.
Yeah.
It's not quite the cool space bubble that you'd get normally.
Well, actually, the bottom part of the suit looks great. The helmet is the part that looks a little bit odd.
Right, and then they've got the little brother labeler sign with their name stuck to the front.
Well, in some ways, the rest of the suit looks pretty much kind of like NASA suits, just kind of a little more colorful.
Yeah, I like the color, and I like the asymmetry. I think it's a kind of neat design. I admit it's, a little goofy, but, it's Star Trek.
Yeah, the helmet is the only thing that doesn't look much like a NASA suit. It looks odd. It looks kind of like what was it, the group that was against S.H.I.E.L.D.?
AIM, right. Yeah.
Looks a little like although those orange suits that they had in that other episode really looks like AIM.
Yeah, right, the beekeeper.
So much I wonder if one was not ripped off from the other.
It's very possible. Now I'm trying to think of who would have came up with the AIM designs.
Probably Kirby, right?
Yeah, probably Kirby. And also, what else here? This is the first appearance in continuity of Uhura's quarters. We later see them in Elan of Troyes. And the chapel scene, in which we see the crew remember Kirk at his memorial service, had about 24 extras, and it stands as one of the largest crew scenes that we see in the original series.
And yet not very effective, because it seems like, most of the crew doesn't care.
Right. And the one that does is like...
It's only 20 people showed up.
Yeah, right.
But it's kind of a cool scene in a lot of ways, because they talk about it. Spock has to lead it, that McCoy feels it's more important for him to be there. And then Scotty actually is the guy who kind of dismisses everybody, which I kind of think shows that how important he is and why he is the kind of the fill-in guy when Spock is...
Yeah, he's the de facto second officer at this point.
Yeah, and you could really see it with that, because he really does take control of it.
Yeah. And he gets drunk later.
Despite the heavy drinking.
Yeah, right. And that set, of course, was used in Balance of Terror as the chapel for the wedding ceremony. And I always like on any Star Trek show, but definitely on original series, where they keep telling us that we're enlightened and we don't have the exact same traditions. But I do like seeing people get married, or I do like seeing a funeral. I like seeing that these are still recognizable human beings who have a lot of the same traditions.
Especially since that time, in the 60s, a lot of that stuff would have been even more important than it is maybe now. Having a religious background and ceremonies and stuff like that. So it's kind of nice to see them acknowledge that.
Yeah. So the third season of Star Trek, or as it's sometimes affectionately or unaffectionately known by fans, the turd season, has problems. Star Trek had been saved from cancellation by a letter-writing campaign organized by Bijo and John Trimble. But even so, behind the scenes, production was in turmoil. Gene Roddenberry had stepped away from the show. He was keeping his executive producer credit, of course, but he was no longer involved in the day-to-day. He did so understandably due to exhaustion, but he was also frustrated with the network, and he was really antagonistic towards them as well. Star Trek was having trouble with its time slot. It had originally been scheduled to return at 8 p.m. on Mondays, which would have been nice. But this is a funny story. Laugh-In producer George Slatter had his heart set on that spot, and he threatened to take his show to another network unless they got the 8 p.m. Monday slot. Were you a Laugh-In fan?
Yeah, I was at the time.
Sure.
I haven't seen it in quite a long time.
Yeah.
I'm sure that's quite dated, but I believe it is a show that we would watch at night. Yeah, so.
Also, the Jerry Lewis show was on Tuesday nights, and it was tanking, and they really wanted to move Trek in at 8 p.m. on Tuesday, which also would have been nice. But there were like heavy contract stipulations that NBC would have to basically buy them out if they moved them. So they couldn't do that.
They had to buy out Jerry Lewis.
Yeah,
right?
yeah. So Trek eventually landed at 10 p.m. on Fridays, which is not a good slot for any show.
I would say at that time, probably the worst slot in TV. Later on, Saturday would become worse. But at that time, they still had, remember, at one point, they had like All in Family, Mary Tyler Moore, Bob Newhart, Carol Burnett were all on Saturday. But so Saturday, but Friday was the death slot because people would go out on Fridays. Yeah, now it's Saturday.
Yeah, right, yeah.
And if you notice, Fridays are often where they'll put something like S.H.I.E.L.D. or Once Upon a Time because they figure that people are going out on Fridays too.
Sure.
But the nerds are still around, perhaps.
Yeah, well, right. They'll watch it. Apparently, country music fans would be around as well because the Grand Ole Opry was actually being carried on a lot of affiliates instead of Star Trek. So I'm going to put it up right now. Minnie Pearl killed Star Trek. That's who's to blame.
I say Jerry Lewis.
Yeah, we'll go back to Jerry Lewis.
Doctor!
The Green Ladies, the show's budget had also been slashed. Each episode of the third season now cost about $180,000, which would be about $1.5 million in 2017 money, which is down from around about 195 or 196 in season one. And just by perspective, the 3 stars of Big Bang each make $1 million an episode for every episode they do.
Yeah. Did the actors get raises with each year too, or not?
They did, and that was another monetary pressure. But I mean, it was nothing like what the Big Bang people were negotiating for. I'm sure
times are so different now.
Yeah.
Also, people know that there's a life after television. The original run. I think back then I don't think a lot of people really saw that these things would last forever. That they'd be in syndication, especially Star Trek.
Yeah, Star Trek was a leader in that. Yeah, absolutely.
Well, I think Desilu, isn't that one of the ideas that the Lucy show, or I Love Lucy or whatever, she knew that there'd be reruns, so they would tape it, or film it.
Right,
and
right.
That was a smart decision.
The show is also experiencing a loss of creative talent. Gene Kuhn, who was a producer and an instrumental writer on the show, had left in its second season, although he would continue to contribute some scripts under a pen name. And as you mentioned, DC Fontana, who was the writer and story consultant for the show's first 2 seasons, would leave the show and be replaced by Arthur H. Singer, who wrote the teleplay for Turnabout Intruder, which is seen by many as one of the low points for the series.
And I would disagree with that.
Really?
I think the concept is a low point. The idea there could be women captains.
Oh, sure.
But I do think it's a kind of a well-acted episode, so I sort of like it. It's so much better to me than some of the ones that are just boring, like the one with Lazarus.
Oh, yeah,
which is just dull and poorly shot and poorly put together, and there's no character bits to hang on to,
Yeah.
Or the one with Landru is like that too. Or Spock's brain, which is I just feel is so ridiculous that it's not worth watching.
That's where I would pull. It is ridiculous, but that's where I would pull out the concept is better than the script, perhaps, because I like the idea of there's this society of advanced women living underground. There's cavemen above ground, and they've got this controller that runs everything. And then I read in a interview or just on a website recently that script was changed a lot from the beginning to its execution, and it was originally supposed to be a commentary on what at the time was controversial, organ transplantation, and it had a lot of humor in it as well. And again, I can't even conceive of what that would have been, but they took out all the scripts and they took out all the commentary, and yeah, we're just left with Spock walking around with no brain.
Well, because it makes no sense.
Yeah, no, it
there's
doesn't really
absolutely no effect on him. He can walk around.
Yeah.
It just, if they had said we just wiped his memories or something like that, that they physically took his brain makes just no sense. It's just one of those things that even with a few hundred years between them, it still couldn't be done. There's just certain things I don't think could be done.
Right. This episode was the first episode for Al Francis as the director of photography. He was formerly a cameraman on the series. He replaced Jerry Finnerman, who was the longtime DP on the show, who left after filming the episode The Empath, partly because he felt like the series had become, quote, ridiculous, end quote, but mainly due to a dispute with Fred Freiberger, who wanted him to accept a wage reduction, and he was not into that.
So as Fred's big thing was basically he just fought the budget and didn't care about anything else? Is that what's going on?
That's what it seems to me, having read These Are the Voyages and sort of researched this. I think that money was a huge pressure, and you have to imagine that if you're making a show like this, which is becoming a worse and worse bet for NBC as it goes on.
So they brought in a different producer that had no background in science fiction?
He was a film writer. He had written, he went on to write some TV, and he had also worked he worked on Wild Wild West previously, where interestingly, he had actually been fired from Wild Wild West for refusing to fire a friend of his who the network wanted gone. And so I think that definitely motivated his decision to just cut out Sineski as soon as he got the word to do that.
Well, I guess producers are different. You'd think that if you wrote Wild Wild West, you might be more creative, but maybe not.
He also oversaw Space 1999. He had presided over The $6 Million Man and Josie and the Pussycats as well. All shows that were either canceled or had ramped down their production after he took over for them. So he seems like the relief pitcher guy.
So this is common that he would come in late into a show. And
it's funny because, Judy Burns has, really good things to say about him. If you look at Inside Star Trek, The Real Story by Salo and Justman, they defend him as well. A lot of the blame gets put on Roddenberry, the network for budgetary reasons, but also Roddenberry for basically abandoning the series.
It sounds like he was in a peak, he was pouting or something.
Oh, yeah. Oh, exactly. Yeah. Judy Burns says that he is a creative writer and he's a nice guy. And he hasn't done many interviews, but he was interviewed, I think, for the TV version, the documentary of Inside Star Trek, where he kind of repeats similar things. Just going back to Al Francis for a second, I wanted to mention that I have a theater background as well, and I've done a little film work. I wouldn't consider myself like a real expert at cinematography, but this is one of the first episodes that I was watching, and I thought, oh, that's bad. That's a mistake. They shouldn't have done that thing that they just did. There's a couple different shots, especially through Francis's tenure, where I think there's a shot in Mark of Gideon where the camera whip pans away to something like we're going to see something that Kirk's looking at, and there's nothing.
Uh-huh.
And then it just goes right back to Kirk. And it's like, well, why would they leave that in there? Or in the opening of the teaser of this episode, they're on the bridge of the Defiant, which is, of course, the Enterprise redressed bridge. And they're just kind of standing there. And then DeForest Kelly actually looks down the barrel of the lens at one point. And I'm not sure. I guess the production was just like, we got it. Let's move on. We've got what we want. Just keep going.
It's, yeah. If they were caught in budget problems, they might not have been able to do more.
Yeah.
It did have one interesting shot where, again, in the scene with the tape, where the last scene, the camera pans down to the computer that had played the tape, which I thought, sort of like acknowledging there was a third person there, sort of.
I see.
The only thing that you could say about the revised version is, of course, they could really beef up the Tholian Web and some of that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
But they couldn't do very much about Kirk's the ghost figure of Kirk.
Yeah.
Because the same photography. So that's the one part that looks kind of weird.
It does.
Because it kind of looks like an old TV show. It's kind of faded or whatever.
Right. And they had already spent a lot of money on that, and they were under time pressure as well, because when they were making these suits, the Kirk suit was like the first one that was finished, so they had to kind of shoot his stuff when they could, and then just pick up the rest when they had finished the rest of these spacesuits. So you've got a producer who is under the gun and is ready to, he's got a hot firing hand. You've got a DP who is possibly inexperienced at his job and is taking longer to do it than usual. And then, as I mentioned, Al Singer, the new writer, he's inexperienced. There's a possibly apocryphal story that DC Fontana tells, that Singer wandered onto the set one day and he asked the set guy, what's the transporter thing do again? And at that point, people were like, all right, we're screwed. Like, we're on our way out here. You've got a production that is definitely in trouble, but one that I think still delivered more than a few great episodes in this third season.
Well, and I think this one and the one with the Enterprise incident, is that from the third season?
Yes.
Those are probably the two standouts, I would say.
I really enjoyed that episode, even though DC Fontana had a big falling out with the production team over the script. She had a couple things in there that were rewritten by Singer that she felt was just not in the character of Spock, and so there was trouble there. I also like The Spectre of the Gun, I think is a classic episode.
Yes, I actually think the empath one, it's very 60s, and it has no background. It's like Batman. By the third season of Batman, they never had backgrounds either.
Right.
It was always in big black boxes.
Yeah.
Spectre of the Gun's like that too. But the actress, she was a soap opera actress who played the empath, is actually good.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
And is memorable. So, there are a couple good. Some of them are good at the end. There's some, like the one with Scotty's girlfriend, Lights of something.
Yeah, of Zetar, yeah.
I mean, that just doesn't. I can't remember a thing about it. And I've seen it probably, just 10 times.
Yeah.
I just don't remember it. I'll give the hippie one and the Spock's brain. I remember them.
Sure.
Let this be your last battleground. I remember it.
Sure, Frank Gorshin.
But some of them just were not interesting.
Yeah.
Occasionally.
And there's a lot of, I think that we talked before about how a lot of the, the effect of not having the places to go, the budgets, the exteriors, and so on and so forth, caused them to focus on character issues. And so we get a lot of good character development, sort of conversations and discussions between the characters. We also get a lot of story elements that would be mined for years beyond this. Savage Curtain introduces Kalish, the character of Surak. We've got Kang in Day of the Dove, who of course would come back in DS9.
Yeah, and Savage Curtain is a good episode, I think. I think there are. See, I don't think the third season is terrible. There's some terrible episodes in the first season. So I'm more forgiving of that. I understand some of the budget problems, but on the other hand, isn't the one with Miramani, isn't that in the third season?
That's right.
They
Paradise
obviously went on location for that.
Yeah, I think they saved up all their outdoor money for that. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, it's not the greatest episode, but it's kind of nice to see the location shooting, for example.
That's another one where Kirk gets whisked away off the Enterprise, and then you've got Spock having to make these really tough decisions, and McCoy's like, "What are you doing? You're doing the wrong thing." Right.
Except that we still have so much emphasis on Kirk. It's almost a total Kirk episode.
Well, yeah.
That's why Tholian Web stands out, because it's not.
Yeah. Well, we're here to praise it and not bury it. We can definitely talk about what we enjoy about the Tholian Web. And I agree, there are, there's goofy elements. It's a 60s sci-fi show, but I agree that the drama is pretty tense. And also, there are just visually arresting kind of things. As you mentioned, the Tholian Web doesn't make a lot of sense. But we've got two ticking clocks in this episode, because we've got Kirk presumably dying of oxygen deprivation, and then we've got to figure this out before they close this web, because we don't know what's going to happen when this thing closes.
The best episodes, a lot of the better episodes of Star Trek do have that ticking time clock going by, that they have to do something by so much. I like those kind of things. It works in television, because, well, there's only an hour to solve the whole thing. It's a little bit shorter than a movie.
Yeah.
When it doesn't work, let's say 24, where they get through LA traffic in like 10 minutes,
if that,
it feels more ridiculous. But here it doesn't. It really feels like there's some tension because they have the space madness. It does explain McCoy's often erratic behavior, and because he apologizes twice, he acknowledges that he's acting out of character a little bit.
And I like the fact that they don't totally hit the gas on him going nuts like the other characters. We just see that, wow, he's really riding Spock pretty hard. And there is an ambiguity whether it is his real emotion or it's a space madness or it's a mixture of both. As far as his emotions go, there is one scene that is probably my favorite scene of the episode where he and Chapel are trying to derive the cure. And then we see that his orderly is starting to kind of go a little wiggy. And he attacks him, and he's trying to kill him, and they're wrestling around. And he's like, ah! And the entire time, McCoy's face is just completely stone cold. Everybody thinks of McCoy as being this really emotional guy, but when his life is in danger, and he's just cold as ice.
Yes, because Chapel hesitates.
Yes,
and then all of a sudden she very smoothly gets the the needle or whatever to knock the guy out. But she sort of hesitates like a woman from a 40s movie.
Yeah, she gets it done.
Scared.
Yeah,
and frankly, that's an odd thing because the orderly, I always interpret that he looks at Chapel with lust.
Oh, I see. Okay.
And so I wonder if that's not he's attacking McCoy because McCoy's standing between him and his babe.
That's a possibility.
But
sure.
It's an odd. He just kind of looks like he's lusting after her, which is out of. But why is he so violent? But
right.
That's my take on it.
I could see that. And as soon as she hits him with the sedative or whatever it is, he hits the ground, and McCoy's right back to business. He's like, "Okay, let's run some tests on him." It's just we see McCoy the professional.
Yes, and then we have these guys crazy screaming in the sick bay.
Yeah,
and you kind of wonder at some point, well, do they put them in the brig after a while because there's so many of them? But they never really go into the numbers. Yeah.
We do. Poor Uhura, she actually gets to see Captain Kirk, and then, of course, nobody believes her. And it's plausible, I think, for a professional like McCoy, who has already had a couple of these cases, to just assume that she's being affected. But she's like, no, I really saw him. And they're like, okay, all right, sweetie, that's fine. Why don't you just lie down?
It's interesting, though. Something's a little interesting where she... how her room is set up, and then she puts on a necklace, which looks very African.
Right.
I think actually those touches are kind of nice. And she also has an interesting smooth hairstyle at this one.
She has dressed down.
Different hairstyles, and this is one of the more acceptable. It doesn't look like the 60s as much. Well, it looks like the 60s, but it doesn't look like a science fiction 60s.
Yeah, she would change a little bit throughout the series, but yeah, this is sort of her casual Uhura look. Scotty also, James Doohan was told in the third season by the production that he had to do the slick back look, which he sports for many of the episodes in the third season, but not in this one in particular. Did you have a favorite moment that you would pick out from this? We've talked about a lot of good moments, but is there something that really stands out for you?
Probably the tape scene.
Yeah, that's a really good one.
Yeah, that kind of explains a little bit of how the three of them connect to each other in some ways. And so I kind of like that the best. And it's, as a guy who used to act, it's just interesting to see the two actors watching a tape and their different reactions. I actually find that quite interesting.
Yeah.
So, and it shows kind of the leadership of Kirk too, a little bit too, and I like that. Why Kirk is the captain.
Yeah, they didn't know at this point that there would be feature films going forward, so it's encouraging to know, and I think it's a good mark on them at this point that they were still able to mine interesting conflict out of the relationship between all these characters. You'd think by the third season we'd be kind of sick of McCoy sniping at Spock and then him sniping back, and yet they would continue that for another 25, 30 years.
Well, yeah, and I saw the Star Trek II in the movie theater a couple months ago, and there still is a little bit of that. McCoy was still doing some of that stuff, and I find you in some ways you think, well, he'd grow out of it, but no, he's
still fresh,
still does it, and it's quite entertaining because at that point he's still pretty healthy looking and all that, and so.
Right.
He's got a lot of energy for it, where by Star Trek VI, he looks like he's pretty worn out.
Yeah, he was getting down there. I really enjoy Spock's dilemma, and also Leonard Nimoy's performance in this episode. I am of the mind that you set up a character, we find out their strengths and what we like about them, and then you make. It's okay to make choices that don't necessarily make any sense. A lot of people complain about characters acting out of character, but I think if you take a choice that a character makes, then we can dig into that. And when
I think that with Spock, it shows the human side.
Yeah,
that he actually has hope, and his logic gives him a scenario where that hope could get paid off with the captain instead of just dismissing it.
I mean, it's ultimately illogical what he does, but maybe it's also his human side that he's able to justify to himself that there is a logical path, and not the fact that he just doesn't want to lose his friend.
Yeah, but, it's an interesting kind of thought because, logic, you can logically get to that point where he came up with a solution that actually works. And I think that's good. It shows a good use of his character, that he wasn't just rigid.
Right, yes.
And I think that's what happens too much is they kind of, it happens in the comics too, that sometimes they make Spock a little too rigid because it's easier that he's a stereotype, that he doesn't have emotions and stuff. But I don't think Leonard Nimoy ever played it that way.
No, and he's such a great actor, and he knows the character so well that he can even deliver a degree of rigidity. But maybe it's my imagination, but I feel like I can see Spock questioning himself. I think the casual viewer wouldn't get it, but that there is a little bit of doubt there in what he's doing.
And there are, and I think McCoy brings it up to him.
Yeah,
and you can see it in his face that it's that he is actually affected by what McCoy said. He's not just this rigid guy who's not even hearing things. He's hearing McCoy, and he knows that there's problems.
McCoy has a devastating line in the episode where they're talking about people seeing Kirk and they're trying to figure out if it's real. And Spock talks about how, well, sometimes people see what they want to see. And McCoy's like, oh, do you think they're seeing him because they've lost confidence in you? And it's like, oh, geez.
Oh, yeah.
Ouch.
Hey, that bitch can scratch.
And that's
one of those kind of things.
I think that's the scene where he spins him around in the chair, too. It's like,
whoa.
Which
is a very aggressive thing. When I was young, I wasn't sure that chair really spun around. I thought it was just kind of, solid. Yeah, I know it moves, but you don't know how fast it can move and stuff like that.
Yeah, it's on casters. I love the. We shouldn't really laugh at alcoholism, but we always get the fun beats out of Scotty going, "Oh, is this a good mixer?" I'll let you know.
Well, yeah, and that's the funniest scene in this. And even the most serious ones, when they work, they actually use a little bit of comedy too. So
right,
that just shows the strength of a good writing, I think. And he delivers this. Scotty comes off very well in this episode.
Yeah, he really does.
Even though he has a very small role, it's not his biggest role, but he comes off quite well. I think Uhura comes off well.
Yes.
Only Chekhov with his mighty screams and kind of overdoing it a little bit.
He's very young. Yes,
he's a young actor. He must have ripped out his throat when he did that. But there's just he does that in several of the other episodes, and it's kind of less effective the more he does it.
Yeah, well, we had to have him in there for the girls. Davy Jones, so popular at that time.
Yeah, probably. Well, there was something about him being a young guy in there and being affected so easily, maybe. maybe that says something too.
I also like I mean, it probably saved them a little money in the long run, but I like the fact that a lot of the inexperienced plot lines or sort of character reactions that you'd put on a red shirt who was destined to die in that episode could just be given to Chekhov. So Chekhov would have a reaction that normally a day player would have.
Yeah, and you would think, I'll tell you, Uhura, you don't really see any women affected by the space madness, and
Right.
your Uhura isn't.
You're right.
And so I wonder if they didn't know what to do, how crazy to make a woman look.
Yeah, they had explored that too, I think, in The Naked Time, where Chapel is being affected by the virus, and of course she's mooning over Spock, so I'm glad we didn't get a reprise of that.
Well, and they easily could have been what they gone for, but it's like it seems like there's still a little bit of reserve about how far they could go with a woman.
Yeah.
Going crazy or whatever.
Well, I think that it's great that they, as you just mentioned, that they sort of checked themselves. I think that they could have easily had like, oh boy, her going crazy. She's a woman, and they they underwrote it. Possibly being aware that they didn't want it to necessarily come off like that. But then again, like I said, she's an officer on the bridge. She comes up and tells the doctor she's seen the captain, and they go, yeah, why don't you just lie down? And then later on, when she's proven right, they're like, oh, you're free to go.
But she's good at it because she really looks so concerned.
Right.
And affected in a quiet core way, as opposed to being
exactly
screaming like Chekhov does.
Right. Well, yeah.
I mean, it's much more effective.
Yeah.
In some ways, I wish Chekhov, the actor and all, they could have sometimes let him underdo it.
Just tell him
in the movies, sometimes they did, and he's more effective in a lot of the movies.
Oh yeah, for sure. Yeah. I also think that
but maybe it's because he was so young. I don't know.
Yeah. Nichelle Nichols does a great job not underplaying it, but playing also the fact that, she's worried that she might be going crazy and that she might end up like the screaming guy in the corner. And we see her sort of dreading that. But again, being a professional, not really losing control.
So, again, I think for most of them, they had good acting parts, and that's part of what I liked. They really just... They explored characters. Almost all of them got to do a little bit of something. Sulu doesn't get to do too much, but most of them got to do something. And I find it a very effective episode, especially considering it's a bottle show and all that.
I agree. I think that it's deservedly well remembered. It is exciting. It adds great elements to the series and the franchise as a whole. And, they're not all bad in the third season, for sure.
No. I think that's a generalization you can't make very often.
Yeah.
Any long-running show, too, sometimes there's off things in the later seasons and so on. Again, The Next Generation, are there that many good episodes in the first 2 years?
Not really.
But by the third season, it really kind of catches fire, and for the most part, most of the rest of it is a really good run.
I'd agree.
But there are a lot of weird episodes in that first season. And the second season had a writer's strike, which kind of...
That hurt them for sure, yeah.
Yeah.
What do you think that a live-action fourth season might have looked like?
Well, assuming it would have the same budget,
yeah,
I assume it'd be somewhat like the third season.
Probably
a mixed bag of stuff. I wouldn't be surprised if they would go revisit storylines.
Sure.
Because at least the start of it has been done, the first part of thinking, and the costumes are already made.
Right, exactly.
And it's just getting actors back, the same Klingon or something like that.
Let's see what Roger Carmel's up to.
Yes, that's a good example because, that he was funny. I wouldn't be shocked if he had come back again, or the Tribbles might come back, with a follow-up, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
Which would have been very fun for fans, I think.
Sure.
That would be the more idealistic look of it. I don't know.
Maybe it's good that we were spared that.
Hot then? Maybe they would have put Flip Wilson on as a captain too. Right. So who knows? They might have done other weird things. Maybe they all dance like Laugh-In every once in a while.
Yeah,
that hippie thing might have been
Goldie
what every
Hawn
episode
shows up. Right.
Yeah. So it could have been something like that, but it really depends. There's so many elements, it's possible Freiberger would have been burnt out.
Yeah, possibly.
It's possible that they saw, maybe somebody said, these aren't as good, let's get Roddenberry back, we can make up to them.
Sure.
So there's a lot of different ways it could have gone. Maybe DC Fontana would have taken over. We would have had a woman running the show. That might have been nice.
That would have been great.
So it's hard to say. I don't know if were there even any intentions of ever going to a fourth season?
Well, there
were a couple scripts written, I think.
Yeah, and I think a lot of those got folded into the animated show later on.
Yeah,
but I think NBC
I think one was about McCoy's daughter, right?
Yeah. I think by the time it was over,
I've drawn that. I've drawn his daughter.
Oh, sure. I think
the DC Fontana wrote a miniseries I drew.
Okay.
And I think she had her graduating from medical school.
Right.
And my little extra joke was the bartender at the little gathering was the bartender from Tribbles.
Oh, okay, sure. Nice.
That was my little joke.
Still getting some work.
Yes.
So as we wrap up here, let's talk My Space Dad Can Beat Up Your Space Dad. Who's your favorite captain and why?
Oh, Kirk is number one. I think because he's the first.
Right.
He's my favorite actor doing it. And he was a good leader with a good sense of humor. I think Janeway is number two, actually, in my mind, because I think she's I think some of the maternal instinct that comes out occasionally. If she's a good scientist, she made good decisions.
She made tough decisions.
She came off well on the bridge. She looked like somebody could command. I think Picard is after that because, of course, he's so beloved and a great actor.
Right.
After that, you got to go Cisco, I think. Archer is the only one that I think I have trouble with, and it's because I believe the writing was so inconsistent that he would start every season with a new take on the character, and I'm assuming that's from the writers or producers.
Yeah.
So there are times where he was kind of a tough guy, and there are times where he's kind of the genial guy. The actor kind of works better as a genial guy, so that's probably what they should have done. They should have said, well, this is our actor.
Right.
Let's make right around him.
It's Scott Bakula.
He's a very good actor, and when he's more genial, and I think by the end they kind of were writing him like that.
Yeah, there's a whole, it's kind of like you said, it's inconsistent, but there's also a kind of whole, I know humanity has to prove themselves, but they're kind of just like, F you so many times to a lot of the elements of the universe. Like, we don't need the Vulcans' help for this, and we're Americans. We're Earthlings, and we're going to get this done.
Right. There's a little of that. There's some things that just don't make sense. Like they have a lot of aliens there, so why are they so weird about aliens in the first season of Star Trek?
Yeah, right.
And to be honest, the woman who plays the second in command or whatever, she is a very stiff actress. She's like a model, not an actress, and she does not really improve. One of those things is sometimes you cast nice-looking people, but they grow. They learn how to act.
Sure.
They get on TV shows. They might come from a soap opera or modeling or something like that, but they learn how to act. Sybil Shepherd got better when she was on Moonlighting. A lot of times that's what happens. She's one who never really improved very much. And it's always a drag on the show when the best actors trip.
Yeah, it's interesting that you mention Janeway and her presence, and I think that all of that is down to Kate Mulgrew. I don't know if you were familiar with the fact that they had originally cast a different actress as Janeway.
Yeah. A French actress, was it?
Yeah, Genevieve Bujold. And if you look at, which is, I like the idea that it's not another like American white lady, but you can look at, they shot almost the entire pilot, or I think maybe the whole pilot, and you can see on YouTube comparisons of her performance versus Janeway.
Oh, really? That'd be interesting. So it's a 2-hour pilot?
I don't think you can watch the whole thing, but you can watch select scenes that are blocked exactly the same. So they knew exactly what they wanted, and she wasn't it. And she doesn't do a bad job, but when you see her up against Janeway, you go, "Oh no, that lady's a captain. Like she is a Starfleet captain."
Yeah, I always got the idea that she was a film actress and she didn't like the rigorous schedule of a television show. There's so many lines, especially Janeway would have had to memorize.
Yeah, it's a different thing.
But I also feel that acting is different on a movie than a TV show.
Yeah, certainly.
TV shows, you can almost get away more with it being a theatrical actor, like Shatner. or Stewart, I think the Mull Group probably too, where you could do a little bit bigger acting and stuff like that, and that could work on TV. Movies, man, Keanu Reeves wouldn't work on TV. He can work in a movie though,
Sure.
because you don't have to do a huge amount because the camera catches everything.
Right.
And so if a director is clever, he can cast a person who really can't act that well and make it effective.
Yeah, you can kind of shoot around it, sure.
Yeah, or make them very stoic, like statues or something like that.
Like Keanu.
Or Zack Snyder does a lot with his characters on movies.
Now that we've reached the end of the show, you will receive a commission and the rank of ensign. What department on the ship would you work in?
I don't know. History, maybe.
Interesting.
One of the historians.
Sure.
And I could hook up with Khan's girlfriend. I don't know. I'm not quite sure how that all works out.
Yeah.
But it'd be nice to have somebody who knew something time that had gone by and could appreciate it.
Sure. I always like when they do Tom Paris on Voyager had an affection for the 20th century and their trappings.
I like those things.
Yeah, so it's like, no, this is called Dr. Pepper. Everybody drank it back then. You get scenes like that.
Well, probably Riker did too. I think the Hill, the detective thing.
Oh, sure, yeah, right.
Picard did.
Yeah.
I will say that, of all the tropes on Star Trek, that holodeck is the one that is too seductive for writers.
Sure.
Because you write anything.
Yeah. And
that makes it too easy.
Right.
And where, like Deep Space Nine, for the most part, used it in a fun way. They went to casinos or played baseball or whatever. They had a spy story, if I remember, James Bond one. All those were quite fun. Sometimes the other shows, I think Voyager is one of them, they would just go too far with that stuff.
Right, yeah, when they're using it.
If you're desperate in space, why are you using energy on holograms?
Yeah, you have 1 million shuttlecrafts to build. Yeah, right.
Yes, don't you have other things to do?
Yeah. Well, Ensign Purcell, thanks for joining me to talk about Star Trek and the Star Trek universe. If people want to continue the conversation, and they can, at EIST Pod on Twitter and the Enterprising Individuals Facebook page, where can people find you online?
Well, I am on Facebook. I'm also on Twitter, both under my full name. Sure. Otherwise, you can see me at conventions occasionally and things like that.
Any conventions coming up for you in the near future?
Yeah, I think I'm going to be in Denver in about April 20th and 22nd. I think I'm going to do a con then. I have a con in Minnesota for the spring con, the 2-day show at the Grandstand in May. I think I'm also going to be in Sioux Falls at the end of May.
Oh, great.
For a weekend. And then one of the things I'll be pushing is I'm doing Stargate Atlantis, a miniseries, and I just handed in my first few pages.
All right.
So the first issue should come out in around late January, then probably every other month from that point. So that's something people can look forward to.
Yeah, people should look out for that.
That's a very good series that had a lot of Star Trek type elements in it. So I think Star Trek fans would probably like it.
Thanks again for joining me.
Thank you very much.
We are signing off till the next mission. Hailing frequencies closed.